Delta Force has several secondary squadrons, including Squadron E, to handle aerial operations. Members of that squadron often fly MH-60 Blackhawks, MH-47 Chinooks, and MH-6 Little Birds during operations.
Right, y'all, welcome back to Combat Arms channel. Okay, so today we're checking out something from the infographics show. Now, I think we've checked out something from this channel, but it was probably a while ago. At least the animation looks very familiar. But this one is titled, How Strong Are U.S. Special Forces in 2024? Now, again, I've never been in like the Special Forces community specifically, but I've been around those folk a lot. I've worked with them a lot. And I kind of understand the mindset, at least with like some of the different special forces, at least in the Marines and the Army. I don't have a whole lot of experience with like Air Force PJs or even like Coast Guard MSRT. I only trained with them a little bit, but kind of understanding the differences and the nuances of that kind of mentality, I can kind of understand at least what it takes or why people want to join certain branches of the Special Forces. But I'm interested to see what this video is actually going to cover. So as far as like how strong the U.S. Special Forces is, I imagine they're going to go over the equipment, maybe some of like the background as far as what it takes to get into some of it. But I think in general, it's probably just going to be the overall size and kind of like armament, which is always pretty cool to learn about as well. We've already gotten a pretty decent background as far as like what it takes to get into some of these services. It's always kind of interesting to see these military topics wrapped up in like an animated video like this. But I always find myself learning something or at least getting like a different perspective. So hopefully we'll get that for this video. So let's go ahead and check it out.
May 2nd, 2011. A pair of helicopters carrying 23 Navy
Osama bin
SEALs,
Laden.
a combat dog,
Remember
and an
that
interpreter
very
descend over
specifically.
Abbottabad in Pakistan. This is the location the United States believes is home to Osama bin Laden, the mastermind behind the 9/11 attack. The SEALs on board are all part of the Red Squadron of Navy SEAL
look so
Team
happy.
6. They've been chosen for this raid because they
mean,
recently
vibe.
returned from operations in Afghanistan. Their leave was suddenly canceled. But this worked out in their favor, as they were able to rehearse without attracting any unwanted media attention. Still, rehearsals can't account for everything, with the team experiencing an unanticipated issue as they reached the compound. One of the helicopters destabilized, forcing a hard landing. Nobody was harmed, and the Navy SEALs were able to continue their mission as planned. Once inside the compound, a team of SEALs makes their way to a guest house in which they believe bin Laden's couriers live. As they prepare to blow the door, they're fired upon from inside.
With a claymore.
First contact. The SEALs return fire before opening the door to discover the body of Abu Ahmad al-Kuwaiti. Bin Laden's primary courier is dead. At the same time, a second team of SEALs has penetrated the compound's main building, where they've killed a second courier and that courier's wife, as well as Khalid bin Laden. Osama is the only target left after making their way up to the
I remember, I don't know if it's true or not, but I remember hearing like they were just using the women as like meat shields basically, which, you know, doesn't surprise me in the slightest. Again, I'm not sure how accurate that is, but I imagine this video is not going to go too in depth into those kind of like gruesome details. It's kind of just like an interesting hype for kind of what this is going to cover. But yeah, I remember that very specifically. I can like remember exactly where I was when like when Obama came on the news and basically said like this had happened. I was like, damn, no kidding, like finally happened, huh?
third floor of the main building. The SEALs break through Osama's door, shooting him dead in his room. But their work isn't over. After collecting electronics, documents, and any other materials that American intelligence teams will find useful, both teams make their way back outside. There, they blow up a helicopter that had been forced to make a hard landing, destroying its stealth technology. Then they board the remaining helicopter along with bin Laden's body and the documents they've gathered to make their escape. The entire operation took just 45 minutes, with the SEALs being in and out before Pakistani authorities were able to mobilize a response. It's the perfect demonstration of the capabilities of a U.S. Special Operations Force, or SOF. These SOFs are the groups the U.S. military has in place to conduct special operations for which the standard military isn't capable. These SOFs are filled with soldiers who are specially trained in specific techniques and equipped with the best equipment the U.S. military
so happy,
has
and they got gold stars on their rifles.
That day in 2011, they became legends of the American Armed Forces. But what if the raid happened today? How strong are the U.S. Special Forces in 2024? There are 9 we'll cover in this video, including the Green Berets, Night Stalkers, Army Rangers, Delta Force, Navy.
Okay, Green Berets, decent experience with them. Same with the Rangers. Navy SEALs, I don't have a whole lot of experience with. Delta, I mean, maybe. I wouldn't have known, probably. Night Stalkers, yeah, those guys are pretty dope as well. I mean, they kind of like lump up with a lot of these other dudes.
SEALs, Navy SWCCs, Marine MARSOC, Marine Force Recon, and Air Force Special Tactics Group.
Real quick, Force Recon and MARSOC. I mean, Force Recon is kind of what MARSOC is now. We do have Marine Recon, but it's not like what Force Recon kind of used to be. Marine Recon is more of like a kind of more advanced infantry with kind of more special operations capable tactics, but not necessarily like Force Recon. That's kind of like an older term for like what MARSOC is now.
Force Special Tactics Group. So, to answer the question of how strong America's special forces are, we need to dig into each of these groups, what they do, and what they represent for the U.S. military. We'll start with the Army Green Berets. The Green Berets are typically tasked with fighting against terrorists
Look like some
by employing
SWCC
guerrilla
berets.
warfare-style techniques. They usually operate in foreign countries, though they're trained to fight in practically any environment, ranging from dense jungle to expansive urban sprawl. Unconventional warfare is the group's modus operandi, and it's typically employed to help foreign countries improve their internal defenses and conduct special recon missions. Though a soldier can technically qualify for the Green Berets straight from basic training, typically by undergoing specialist training on top of basic, most come from the U.S. military's enlisted soldiers. To be eligible, an enlisted soldier must have a pay grade of E3 or above, meaning they're on the third level of the enlisted soldier's pay scale and are qualified to receive secret clearance. SWCC includes an initial 2-week trial in which candidates are vetted.
And that's why the training is so long.
Reserved for those who make it past the first 2. The Green Berets are among the largest of America's SOFs, with the branch typically having 5,500 active duty members at any one time, along with about 1,100 who serve with the National Guard. However powerful as this SOF may be,
still a little more than I thought.
Struggling with recruitment in recent years. That's according to military.com, which notes that 2022 saw the Green Berets attract just 779 recruits compared to the 1,358 it attracted in 2021.
Damn, I didn't know it was that bad. I mean, yeah, I see all, like, the emails go out all the time of them trying to like recruit and stuff, which is fine and dandy, but a lot of the information like doesn't apply to me just because like the pay grade will be off, or like the MOSs that they're actually like looking for might be like a little bit off too. But yeah, they blast that out to like everybody. And from what I heard, I mean, they're not like watering down their standards necessarily, but there are certain things that I guess they were looking for before that they don't necessarily care about as far as the packet is concerned now. So maybe some of the like admin stuff is a little bit easier, but I think overall the quality is still like, they're still trying to keep that pretty high.
It's a formidable force that brings a high level of versatility to the U.S. Special Forces. Next up, the Army Night Stalkers. This is the name given to the members of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, all of whom are extremely talented aviators. Their primary role is to run nighttime operations internationally using helicopters, such as the assault on Bin Laden's compound. While the Navy SEALs took the headlines in that assault, it was the Night Stalkers pilots who got the SEALs in and out of Bin Laden's compound. As for the SOF, it contains 4 battalions, and it calls Fort Campbell in Kentucky its regimental headquarters. Combined, the 4 battalions include 2,700 members, including support personnel, with each battalion having access to highly modified light, medium, and heavy choppers to ensure the versatility needed to take on a wide array of missions.
We got some here in Washington.
As the United States Army Special Operations Command puts it,
their helicopters look so cool.
Is a 3-time volunteer. First for the U.S. Army, then airborne training, and then once again for the regiment. So we've already been seeing a pretty comprehensive collection of special forces to start from. The Green Berets handle the complex operations in foreign countries on the ground, with the Night Stalkers playing a key role in getting other SOF members in and out of.
Honestly, if I can shadow any of these special forces, like on a day-to-day, it would be the Night Stalkers, because just like, yeah, being like a special operations or special forces person like on the ground is one thing, but having to rely and just be like so proficient with these helicopters and stuff, like the stuff they do is insane. You see them get hit by like an RPG and they'll still land the thing like super calm in like 5 seconds. It's wild.
Locations. The third of the U.S. Army's SOFs is the Army Rangers. Train, endure, overcome. Those 3 words serve as the 75th Ranger Regiment's motto.
Oh, they love doing what they're doing.
As the SOF handles a range of operations.
That's what I've seen.
These include special raids behind enemy lines, in which they seize or destroy targets. Forcible entry falls under their remit, with a particular focus on taking control of airports and similar large complexes, with gathering intelligence on enemies via reconnaissance also a key Army Ranger task. Then comes the training. The U.S. Army website says the training is split into 3 phases: Benning, Mountain, and Florida. In Benning, the prospective Army Ranger learns the tactical fundamentals needed to be a part of the crew and undergo tests of their physical stamina. From there, they move into the mountain phase, where they're stationed at Camp Frank D. Merrill to learn about military mountaineering and various techniques for employing platoons in mountain environments. Finally, they move into the Florida phase, switching the training focus to waterborne operations, with stream crossings and small boat techniques coming into play.
Okay, so with actual like Army Rangers, like the Ranger regiments, you have to go through RASP, which is the assessment selection program. That is, from what I remember, is like 8 weeks long. So there's RASP 1 and RASP 2 if you're like a senior NCO or like a warrant officer, if I remember. So you go through RASP, and that's kind of like how you get into the Ranger regiment. What they're kind of describing here is like Ranger School. Yeah, Ranger School is generally something that, like, if you're in the Ranger regiment, you basically have to go through Ranger School. And I'm not sure if you can even stay in the regiment if you don't successfully graduate it after like a couple attempts. But yeah, you do end up going through Ranger School, but RASP is kind of how you get into the regiment, not necessarily the Ranger School with the whole, mountain phase and whatnot.
As for the SOF's manpower, it's typically around 3,500 people strong, with a small contingent of civilian support personnel. Each member of the Army Rangers has completed its brutal training regimen and will often be responsible for spearheading the American attack into new territory. Through the Army Rangers
are
the
good
U.S. military
people.
special forces
From what
have
I've seen, they're like
versatility and
really
key
solid.
skills in ground-based operations. But what if the United States needs to deal with a specific terrorist threat? That's where the famous Delta Force comes into play, also known as the First Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. Delta Force is an extremely secretive unit that typically handles America's covert counterterrorism needs. This includes handling covert raids, rescuing hostages, and in some cases direct combat engagement on the ground. The organization finds its roots in the Green Berets, having been founded by a former Green Beret named Charlie Beckwith, as well as in the United Kingdom Special Air Service, or SAS. Having worked with the SAS in Malaya, Beckwith noted that the U.S. needed a special forces organization composed of small and agile groups that could handle delicate operations. Delta Force was born. Delta Force often pulls its members from other SOFs, including the Army Rangers and Green Berets.
Red ball.
Though any soldier aged 21 who's actively serving in the U.S. Army, in the National Guard, or part of the reserves can apply.
See, I don't think I know anybody in
qualifications
Delta.
or be willing to study for them, and must have a near spotless
No, I don't know if
disciplinary
I
record.
would.
Assuming he meets the criteria, the candidate then completes a 4-week training course that's modeled after SAS training. This course includes a timed 18-mile ruck march, in which the candidate hauls a 35-pound rucksack while navigating through unforgiving terrain at night. Another 40-mile march sees them carrying a 45-pound rucksack in steep terrain.
40 miles.
There's more.
Golly.
The few who pass this selection process enter the Operations Training Course, which lasts 6 months and is designed to turn a raw recruit into a Delta operator. After that, they're assigned to a Delta Force squadron.
I love seeing like
and
the
they're ready to
unclassified
go.
pictures
As
of
for the
Delta
squadrons,
dudes.
Delta Force has 4 primary assault
Just
groups,
looking like civilians in
labeled
some
A to
random
D,
country.
each of which has 75 members that split into 3 25-person troops. 2 of these troops focus on direct action, such as the hostage rescues mentioned earlier, with the other handling reconnaissance, sniping, and infiltration. Further segmentation occurs within the troops as Delta Force follows the SAS model by deploying teams of between 2 and 6 people during operations. Delta Force has several secondary squadrons, including Squadron E, to handle aerial operations. Members of that squadron often fly MH-60 Blackhawks, MH-47 Chinooks, and MH-6 Little Birds during operations. Other tertiary squadrons focus.
I've only seen a few like special operations, like helicopters close up, and they look different. A lot of times they're also like just painted like a very dark black. It looks really sick. But the amount of like technology and stuff that's in those compared to like the normal helicopters is probably pretty mind-blowing, especially when you talk about like Delta. I don't even know. I wonder if the Night Stalkers fly Delta around as well. I mean, it must be them. They already have like the whole reputation and training pipeline together, so I imagine it's probably them as well.
On training and intelligence, with the standout being the Computer Network Operations Squadron, or CNOS, which handles computer hacking and cybersecurity operations.
Interesting.
Typically, Delta Force will have around 2,000 members at any one time, though only between 200 and 300 of those members will be operators who get assigned to combat missions. If that all sounds like
still more
Delta
than I
Force would be
thought.
well suited to taking out Osama bin Laden, then you'd be right. It shares the same counterterrorism goals as the Navy SEALs. And with that, we'll move on to the SOF that opened the video. The Navy SEALs handle a range of counterterrorism operations, focusing on...
Okay, I'm very confused. I like how they're parachuting in, and they're not really landing in the water or anything either. Just like parachuting in with like this scuba gear onto the beach.
When inserting and extracting soldiers by sea, land, or air. They're often deployed when the United States needs to take out or capture high-value enemy targets, such as the previously
Again, having like the
mentioned Bin Laden.
maritime
And like Delta Force, they're
diver
usually deployed
aspect
on
of it.
covert operations that require a
pretty
great
cool.
degree of training and secrecy. President John F. Kennedy established the SEALs in 1962
Like
to
deploying
offer
from
the US
submarines
military
is
an agile
wild.
maritime force that could handle aspects of unconventional warfare. Like Delta Force, SEALs usually deploy in small units to take out specific targets, though they'll also handle underwater reconnaissance and clearing routes to enable larger forces to conduct amphibious landings. Becoming a SEAL is no easy task. The initial entry criteria includes achieving a strong
I like how he
ASVAB
did the
score and
ASVAB
meeting
in
eyesight requirements.
the dive
Candidates
gear.
can't be colorblind and must have 20/40 vision in their best eye and 20/70 or better in their worst. There is an age cutoff. Candidates can be no
Being
older than
colorblind.
28, and all candidates must pass a physical exam designed for divers.
Not an issue
Then
for most
the training
things,
starts. After
but it
passing
does
through
limit some
recruit
cool
training
stuff.
command, also known as boot
Sucks.
camp, the recruit completes a 12-month training course that includes BUD school, underwater demolitions training, and parachute jump school. During those 12 months, the candidate endures the brutal Hell Week, which NavySeals.com calls the defining event of BUD's training. Over 5.5 days, the candidate
I'm sure
has
everybody
their
knows a
mental
little
and
bit about
physical
BUDs
endurance
and Hell
tested,
Week
often
specifically.
while operating on less than 4 hours sleep. Running, swimming, carrying boards, and paddling are constant, as are physical exercises. This week is designed to push the candidate to their physical limits, but the mental challenge is often the toughest to handle.
See, when I was in Marine Corps boot camp, we had the Crucible at the end, which is like right before you get your Eagle, Globe, and Anchor and become a Marine. And I was expecting it to be like super tough, and it was about like 3, maybe 4 days. I think it was about 3 days. I think it's like 72 hours. But it was not that hard at all. And I was like barely sleep deprived. I was more hungry than anything, but even still, we weren't doing anything that was like physically that taxing. So I was kind of a little bit let down.
The SEALs want to know how their candidates can handle being exhausted, soaking wet, and approaching hypothermia.
Oh my
As
gosh.
for the SOF strength, the Navy SEALs accounts for about 1% of the U.S. Navy's personnel and will usually have around 2,450 operators at their disposal. By now, you're
Damn.
starting to see a trend. Each of these SOFs is a relatively small force trained to an elite level to cause maximum damage to the enemy. But in the case of the SEALs,
Hell
it's
yeah.
not just the SEALs themselves who an enemy has to worry about. It's the SOFs that support the SEALs. And that brings us to the Navy
The
SEALs
SWCC.
mission, or more famously, SEAL Team 6. A special team within the Navy SEALs, SEAL Team 6 was founded following the Iran hostage crisis, in which Iranian students seized the U.S. embassy in their country and held 52.
If I remember correctly, I don't think they had 6 SEAL teams when they actually created it. I think they just kind of like named it SEAL Team 6. So if people found out about it, they would think there were like more SEAL teams than there were. That's what I heard. I don't know if it's like a wives' tale or something.
Americans hostage for 444 days. The low point of that crisis was an attempted rescue of the
That's wild.
hostages in 1980, in which an SOF was supposed to fly in, extract the hostages, and fly out. It failed spectacularly. 2 of the 8
Yeah.
helicopters on the mission malfunctioned before arriving at the staging area, with another breaking down once it was on site.
Oh my
The
gosh.
SOF decided to
Relatable.
withdraw, only to see one of the
Yikes.
operational helicopters collide with a support craft, killing 8 soldiers. The debacle forced a rethink in
That's
how
so
the U.S.
fucked up.
military carries out hostage extractions, with SEAL Team 6 being born from that rethink. Specifically, the aftermath of the failure of Operation Eagle Claw in 1980. Technically, the group no longer exists. It was disbanded and absorbed into the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, or DevGRU, in 1987. But the SEAL Team 6 moniker has stuck, because, let's be honest, it's cooler and catchier than DevGRU. And today it's a unit
Oh,
of around
DevGRU sounds
300
pretty
Navy
fucking
SEAls,
mean.
divided into 4 line squadrons: red, blue, gold, and silver. Each of those squadrons contains about 50 operators who are divided into 3 groups and then divided again into teams of assaulters and snipers. There are also suggestions that SEAL
still
Team
stuck
6
on why
has
they
a
gave
gray
them
squadron,
FAMASas.
which is dedicated to maritime operations,
They
as
look
well as
cool.
a black squadron, which handles reconnaissance and surveillance. So, think of SEAL Team 6 as an SOF within an SOF. It's the arm of the Navy SEALs that handles hostage extractions, though it's also often used in counterterrorism operations.
I've heard some stories about the
VIPs in sensitive
SEAL
situations.
snipers.
But that's
They're
not
very
the only
disciplined.
SOF that's adjacent to the SEALs. There's also the Naval Special Warfare Combat Crewmen, or Navy
Why do they look like that?
SWCCs. For a Navy SEAL to conduct their counterterrorism operations, they need people to insert and extract them.
We need like
We
a
saw
minigun
in
on
the
that
operation
thing,
to kill
at
Bin Laden,
least.
as the SEALs worked alongside the Night Stalkers to enter the Al-Qaeda leader's compound. For amphibious insertions, that task falls to the SWCCs. They operate the small vessels that get the SEALs in and out of areas and handle a lot of intelligence gathering needed.
I know it's not like a military-specific channel, it's just like the infographic show, but these animations are so awesome.
Intelligence gathering needed for such missions. That includes tracking shipping traffic and gathering information about
That's a nice
enemy
looking house.
military installations. The SWCC also takes part in direct raids, typically focusing on waterborne threats and enemy shipping, as well as handling all the maintenance needed for the ordnance systems, electronics, and small boats required for special operations missions. Think of them as a supporting SOF. To become an SWCC member, a
High-speed
candidate
boat
must
crewman.
complete boot camp at Recruit Training Command before moving on to a specially designed training course. This includes 2 weeks of indoctrination held in Coronado, California.
I always wondered what it
in
took
which
to get
the
into
candidate is
SWCC.
prepared for physical and psychological
Or
trials.
if they get a
that lie
special
ahead.
badge too.
Next up is a 5-week basic crew member
Like the
training
SEALs
course
do.
covering basic water competency and
Oh
boat
yeah, they
handling.
do, huh?
Then comes full crewman qualification
it,
training, a 15-week course covering the advanced skills and tactical understanding an SWCC member needs to have for their role in special missions. Though closely associated with the Navy SEALs, the SWCC supports any SOF that requires amphibious entry to and extraction
Interesting.
from a target.
I wonder
They
who
are
else
an
that would be
elite
beside
force.
the
There are
SEALs,
always
though.
600 active-duty SWCC operators at any one time, with a further 125 reserves. Sticking with the U.S. Navy, we move on to the SOFs that are part of the U.S. Marines. First up, Marine MARSOC, otherwise known as the Marine Raiders. Founded in
yeah.
February 2006, MARSOC is another SOF that's capable of conducting counter-terrorist operations, as well as engaging in reconnaissance and direct action against hostile forces. However,
sir.
the reason it was founded, and one of its primary tasks, is to offer foreign internal defense. This involves working alongside foreign governments and their militaries to train them in the skills they need to maintain their own national security.
Yeah, I have a
So,
lot of
we see
MARSOC
another
buddies.
aspect of
They're
US
always doing some
SOFs
cool
emerge.
stuff in
While most
random
of these
countries.
groups focus on conducting operations to protect the U.S., with MARSOC being no different in some respects, the Marine Raiders have a secondary role that allows the U.S. to build stronger ties with other countries. Those relationships protect the U.S. even further, as having allies in far-flung places is always advantageous. As for getting into MARSOC, a candidate first has to complete the organization's assessment and selection
It's a
phase,
doozy.
which
You
is
better be a good
essentially a
swimmer.
test of their physical and mental acumen. From there, they enter a
And
4-phase,
with Recon
30-week
as
training
well.
program that covers the basic skills they'll need to survive in the SOF, followed by small unit tactics, close quarters battle strategy, and aspects of irregular warfare. Assuming the candidate passes, they join a team of around 3,500 people, 1,000 of whom are active
all so
Marine
happy.
Raiders. The rest are civilians and support personnel, though it's typical for all who serve with MARSOC to
From what I hear from my MARSOC buddies, the Raiders, like some bureaucracy has been kind of getting in the mix a little bit too much, and it's been kind of like messing up the vibe pretty significantly. I'm not sure if it's kind of changed in the last like year or two, but from what I heard pretty recently, it was getting a little kind of silly with how they're doing it. A lot of people were getting kind of disgruntled with like the focus that they were doing, like trying to go back to like professionalism and not wearing like certain uniforms, things like that.
be referred to as a Marine Raider, regardless of whether they've completed MARSOC training. Next up, Marine Force Recon. Though many of the U.S. Marines Force Recon personnel have been integrated into MARSOC, the Marines still maintain several dedicated units that are, as the name implies, focused on gathering battlefield intelligence. Think of Force Recon as the SOF that shapes the battlefield. Their members handle scout swimming, small boat operations, and coastline reconnaissance, gathering intelligence that other SOFs use in their operations. Then there are the Green operations. These combine ground and amphibious reconnaissance, with Force Recon usually gathering information about targets before reporting that information to their commanders. The difference with the
Honestly, like Marine Recon, they're pretty cool. I mean, it's kind of like if you take an infantry unit and just get them like even more kind of disciplined and squared away, and again, more like special operations capable, obviously. specifically like maritime operations. You'll have a lot of like the recon units that are like on ships or part of amphibious ready groups. They'll basically be like a kind of like a reaction force that can deploy on their small boats. Specifically, when I was working with them, they were doing more of like maritime kind of raids. So they take their small boats from like the ships, like the LPDs and whatnot. They take it from the amphibious ships, and then they would go and kind of like raid another ship, whether it be like something that potentially had like pirate issue, or there was like another ship that was kind of within their vicinity, and they just had to go on the ship and clear it out. The recon dudes were kind of focusing more on that. But yeah, as the name implies, they also do more of like the recon aspect. From my perspective, they didn't seem as much of like a special operations or a special forces. Special operations, sure, but like special forces, it kind of just seemed like a more squared away, more kind of nuanced infantry unit. Kind of just in how they behaved, kind of how the organization felt. And also just kind of how they were equipped.
These missions is that the Force Recon soldiers go deep into enemy territory. Often their work places them beyond the boundaries of support that would otherwise be offered by artillery or naval gunfire, meaning stealth is a key weapon in a Force Recon member's arsenal. It's an even more important weapon than the member's actual weapons. If a Force Recon soldier has to fire their gun, they've failed to carry out their mission properly. The information these special operators gather can mean the difference between success and failure in a military operation. Currently, Force Recon
you break
has
contact.
835 members, divided into 5 167-member companies.
Direct action
3
is
are
not
on
going to be
active
fun.
duty, allowing 1 per Marine Expeditionary Force. The other 2 teams are kept in reserve. Finally, there's Air Force Special Tactics, otherwise known as the 24th Special
Again, these are the guys I know the least about, so hopefully we can like learn a little bit. But I know some of the information in this video might not necessarily be the most accurate, but hopefully we can kind of weed through, separate the wheat from the chaff, as they say.
Special Tactics, otherwise known as the 24th Special Operations Wing. An array of units fall under this banner, including the 720th Special Tactics Group, the 724th Special Tactics Group, and a host of overseas squadrons. Collectively, these units are responsible for most of the aerial support other SOFs require and aiding the wider U.S. military. The group's website divides its operations into 4 distinct categories. First up, global access. Whenever the United States or one of its allies needs to set up a landing zone or airport, Air Force Special Tactics is usually involved. It handles the assessment and opening of these locations, regardless of whether they're in peaceful or hostile territory.
I guess I never thought about it. I always think of like the Rangers or some other special forces group just kind of seizing an airfield. But I guess when you're talking about kind of making your ad hoc area or ad hoc landing zone or something, it makes a lot of sense that they would kind of be used for that. But when I hear special tactics, again, that's kind of not what I was thinking.
Needs to enable aerial access to a location. Air Force Special Tactics also handles precision strikes, and that's exactly what it sounds like. The SOF coordinates with aerial teams to direct munitions to targets. However, this category has a secondary aspect in which the SOF also uses its skills to direct humanitarian aid to appropriate locations. Here we see a similar spirit of international cooperation as we see in MARSOC's work with foreign governments. Air Force Special Tactics is as important for helping the U.S. build alliances as it is in supporting the U.S. Air Force in its strikes. Next, personnel recovery. Like several of the other SOFs we've examined so far, Air Force Special Tactics maintains teams capable of extracting people from difficult positions. Its people handle mission planning and coordinate the technical aspects of aerial rescues. It's also the treatment side, with this arm of the SOF containing specially trained medical personnel who can help those being extracted while they're in an aircraft. Building on that medical aspect, there is the final category of battlefield surgery. Air Force Special Tactics maintains Special Operations Surgical Teams, or SOSTs, which are lightweight units of mobile medical specialists who are capable of performing life-saving surgery anywhere.
That's cool.
SOSTs are often deployed ahead of traditional medical personnel and will enter combat zones with tailored backpacks that allow them to operate with a much smaller footprint than other SOFs. These teams usually only contain 6 members, with their job simply being to keep the injured alive as they await extraction. With such a wide-ranging remit, it's difficult to find information about the specific training that members of this SOF undergo. Some will focus more on flying, while others are more heavily trained in medicine. Still, the SOF maintains 1,580 personnel, about 1,450 of whom are military.
That is not a
versus
lot.
around 130 civilians.
Especially
So where
from
does
what
all
I think
this
about
leave
the Air
us in
Force,
terms of
pretty
assessing
big
the strength of
branch.
America's Special Forces in 2024? It's clear that the U.S. Special Forces can handle practically any mission due to the large number of SOFs it maintains. Versatility is the key word here. Teams are trained in everything from conducting counter-terrorist strikes on the ground to gathering intelligence and direct combatants in the field. Perhaps that's just the most important thing to understand about the U.S. Special Forces. They aren't just one group of soldiers who all go through the same training. There are several groups, each with their own specializations and each capable of cooperating with others on joint operations. Their training has been refined, often.
Yeah, honestly, from what I've seen, like the more high speed you get in like special forces, the harder it is to delineate between like an intelligence agency, like a really like the really high speed intel folks like CIA and whatnot. I mean, I know they have like their ground branch or whatever, but yeah, from what I've seen, it gets pretty hard to delineate because they do have such like a high strategic level, and a lot of it is kind of just like very, very clandestine, kind of like covert, and they're just doing these things with basically nobody else understanding or knowing that they're doing it.
Over the course of decades, and as the operation to kill bin Laden proves, each of these SOFs can be deadly effective when called upon. Now check out this video, U.S. Special Forces
I like that
versus
thumbnail.
Wagner Group.
Okay, cool. I mean, again, it is pretty much what I expected. I know some of the information might be outdated or might just kind of be like very surface level as far as like if you just heard a name and you did like some cursory research, this is kind of the information that you would see. But it makes a lot of sense kind of, you know, with this YouTube channel being the infographic show, it's not, again, military specific. So they're not going to go too in depth or have kind of maybe even like insider knowledge, people they could actually ask, like military experts or subject matter experts, to kind of understand and delineate what each of these different, you know, branches or agencies do. But it is kind of cool. It gives us a good kind of like surface level, kind of understands the differences with certain groups. Again, it gets kind of like hazy when you're talking about like MARSOC versus SEALs versus like Green Berets. It can get very difficult to kind of understand that. And even for me being in the Marine Corps and the Army, having served with some of these people, it's still a little bit hard for me to understand. But again, that's kind of why they're the Special Forces and kind of why a lot of their stuff is very hidden, and it can be kind of hard to understand it unless you kind of have more of those insider knowledge or have buddies who are in those organizations. But definitely a cool video. I do like the animations a lot, not gonna lie. It's pretty fun to watch them. Again, they're not meant to be like crazy accurate or, you know, what have you, really even show that much of a difference between the different like branches and stuff as we saw. But it is kind of cool to be able to kind of see this and get a cursory understanding of these different groups. A lot of people don't even know about a lot of these, like the Night Stalkers specifically. They're definitely getting a lot more attention. I think a lot of people kind of are more aware of them. But the fact of them being those specialized pilots, a lot of people might think it's kind of like internally held, like the SEALs had their own pilots or things like that. So it's kind of cool to shed some light on that, and also gives a little bit more kind of background as to kind of what SWCC is, and also what kind of training they do, because I didn't know what the SWCC pipeline looked like, to be honest. I kind of thought like at first it was like a specialty of, you know, like you can be a SEAL and then you can be kind of SWCC, which is kind of more of like the small boat operations. But yeah, kind of two different things. So yeah, interesting to kind of wrap your head around that and open the perspective a little bit. But let me know what you guys think. If you guys learned anything, if you guys can add or clarify or even correct anything, even anything that I said, because again, some of what I said might be either outdated or just kind of, you know, wrong in general, because I don't have a lot of the insights into some of these special forces. So if you guys do want to add any of that or correct me, definitely feel free to do so. But if you guys learned anything, let me know down in the comment section. And if you have any questions that I could potentially try and answer, definitely feel free. If you guys are thinking about like kind of joining one, or if you want to understand like maybe which special forces group might be more tailored to kind of like your interests or really your strengths, then let me know. I can maybe kind of steer you in the right direction from what I've seen. And also personality wise with those, you know, organizations, people who've been in that, I can kind of maybe assess that too. But yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and that is it for this one. I will see y'all in the next one.